Welcome back, folks, to the Launchkey Mini for Beginners series. We are going to be covering today utilizing the scale mode on the Launchkey, using the arpeggiator, and so far we've built up some drums, we've built up some chords, and now it's time to add some melody using these features. We will even start doing a little bit of mixing with the encoders. If you haven't watched the previous parts of this series, I definitely encourage you to do so because I'm trying to build you up on that solid foundation so that you can start producing confidently with the Launchkey Mini and also potentially craft some performances with the Launchkey Mini. This series is supported by channel members who have been getting early access to every chapter. If you want to support the channel and get early access to the next chapter of this series, go ahead and click the join button down below or subscribe plus, whatever it says these days. Become a member and I'll see you there. But for now, let's jump in. Alright, let's start by talking about the built-in scale mode on the Launchkey Mini, and we'll create a melody. So first, from Ableton Live's library, I'll go to Instruments, I'll open up Drift, and I'll find a simple keyboard or plucked sound. I like this faded keys sound. Now I'm going to drop this in on an empty MIDI track, which I have here on track 3. If you don't have an empty MIDI track, you can go to Create, Insert MIDI Track, or if I just scroll over a little bit, you can see where it says Drop Files and Devices here. If I just grab that instrument and drop it into that empty space, it will create a MIDI track for me. But I don't need that one since I already dropped one over here. But now we have the faded keys track. And by the way, I'm working in the same project and session as the previous session, but that doesn't matter too much right now. What matters is I've got this new keyboard instrument. It is armed, and I can play it with my Launchkey. Now let's find the scale button on the Launchkey, and you can see right away the screen changes, and it says C major. I've just enabled the scale mode so that any key that I press will be in the key of C major, which is usually all white keys. So that's what I expect to hear, but now if I play the black keys, all those keys are now notes in C major. It has sort of locked them to our set key. And if I turn this first encoder, I can change the root note or what key I'm actually in. So let's go to E major. Now any key that I press will be in E major. The next encoder changes the modes. Now, if you're already familiar with music theory, you probably know what modes are. If you don't know what modes are, don't worry too much. Essentially, I just changed from E major to E minor. And there are many other modes out there. For the purposes of this series, we're going to stick to just being in major or minor. But if you know all about modes and you want to lock your scale to a different mode, you know that it's there for you. Now, the next encoder is really important. Before we go there, I'm just going to shift us back to C major. And then I'm going to go to the third encoder and change the play mode. Now I've changed it to filter out of scale, which means any key that is not actually in our set scale of C major will actually not make any sound. That's not what was happening before, because if I go back to snap to scale, that takes every key and snaps it to the closest note within that key. So any key you press will be a right note in that particular key. Filter out of scale takes all of the out of key notes and just mutes them. No sound. There's one more mode which is really interesting, and it's called easy scale. What that does is, I'm going to go ahead and turn encoder 1 and just change it to a random key like A sharp major. What this does is assigns the notes of that scale to the white keys from what would be C to C. So right now, even though I'm playing what should be a C major scale on this keyboard, I'm actually hearing an A sharp major scale. And if I change the root note to, say, E major, you can see those same keys are now set to E major. And that will work for any key you set it to. That's called easy scale mode. For now, I'm going to switch us back to snap to scale. I'm going to keep us in C major because the chords that I was working on earlier are in C major. Now let's launch a couple clips. try to create a very simple melody. Now just choose a few notes if you're feeling slightly uncomfortable. So I created that simple melody while in scale mode, which I'm playing in C major anyway, so I probably didn't need it. So I created that melody just using C, D, G, and then eventually I used an E, so 4 notes total. And I just thought about simple phrasing, dun, 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 and direction. The first phrase is ascending, going up. The second phrase just kind of descending, starting on the G. That sort of experimentation and improvisation is something you'll get more comfortable with over time the more you make music. Of course, the scale function helps a lot if you're not familiar with playing with different keys, so take advantage of that feature, especially in the beginning as you're getting more comfortable. There's no replacement for fully understanding different keys and having a bit of music theory as a foundation. I've got a full music theory series here on this channel. Definitely recommend you check that out if you want to go deeper and not have to rely on the scale mode that's built in here. But next, let's utilize another feature, the arpeggiator. If I turn on the arpeggiator and I play a few keys and hold them down, you can hear that it's playing through the notes that I'm holding down. It's arpeggiating through them. We hear arps all the time in electronic music, and there's a few different ways we can kind of alter this arp right here. So utilizing the encoders, and we can actually see what each encoder represents from the screen here. First encoder is BPM. Now ideally, we will want the arpeggiator to sync with our DAW, our Ableton Live. We'll set that up in just a minute. But BPM is right here, followed by swing. You can hear as I turn swing up, the melody becomes swung. It's less rigid and less equally spaced. Very common across different genres of music. I'm going to keep it at 0 for now so that we have a very clear understanding of the time divisions, which is our next encoder, the rate. We can turn it to eighth notes, 16ths, 30 seconds, but let's keep it down here at eighth notes probably. Our next encoder here is gate, which determines how long a note can be before the next note enters. Of course, depending on your actual synth's release time, gate will have more or less of an effect. Next, if you take a listen to how these notes are being played, they're starting from low and going to high. Dun, 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 dun. That's called the direction, and that's a very common parameter that we can adjust in arpeggiators. So type, we currently have up. We're going upward. We can go the opposite direction and we can go down. And there's other direction modes. We have up, down. You can hear that it ascends through the notes and then descends back down. As we turn this knob, we have a few different selections, like even random, where it won't play in any particular order. We'll just play them in a random order. Before I move on to the next two encoders, let's talk about how to latch the ARP. If I hold Shift and press ARP, it is now latched, meaning that all I have to do is press these keys one time, and it will continue to play through the arpeggiation. Now for this next part, I'm going to go to my synth in Ableton Live, and I'm going to turn down the release time, which is going to give me some really short notes. Now I'm playing through an arpeggiation, turning down the release time, really short notes once again. And now I'm going to press and hold the ARP key. This reveals the rhythm menu for the arpeggiator, I guess you could call it. If I turn these lights off, I can create rhythm, so it's not just playing straight eighth notes anymore. Now, this is exactly what we were seeing previously with the rhythm page on the encoder. Illuminated pads, unilluminated pads. But this bottom row of pads also gives us another layer of functionality based on where the function button is. So we're in the red function mode here, which is ties, meaning I can hold notes until the next step, tie them over. Or I can accent specific notes. These notes are coming in at a little bit of a higher velocity. They're accented. It's slightly hard to hear with this synth sound, I think. And finally, ratchet, which will add multiple notes to a single step. You heard that? It's kind of a really small subdivision of time that we call a ratchet. Combine this with mutation, different rhythms, a little bit of swing, change the gate length, change the direction. You can come up with really interesting arpeggiations, which are sort of going beyond the traditional arpeggiator functionality and becoming more of like a very simple sequencer. Now, something I mentioned that's very, very important if you want to take full advantage of the arpeggiator when making music in Ableton Live is that we need to sync the arpeggiator to Ableton Live's tempo. So currently my project is set to 120, but we do have this BPM encoder, which allows me to change the tempo, which is not very useful if I want to be in sync. So let's go into Live's settings. Under link tempo and MIDI, we are going to sync this second output port of the Launchkey Mini and press sync. Now, what will ultimately happen is the project is not currently playing, and I can freely turn this tempo encoder. So it seems like our problem is not solved, but hold that thought. First of all, I'm just going to stop the clip that's playing in our synth track. I'm going to press play to play back our project. And now, if I try to turn this BPM, you can see that it's set to tempo external 120 BPM. I basically cannot change it, which means that I can play along with the project and be in time. And if I change the rate, I've got that ratchet in there. That's very funny. Here, let's change that. Turn the ratchet off, change the rhythm, change the octave. I like this. Record it. Now I'm in latch mode, so this is just playing in Ableton Live and recording those notes as they go into the DAW. So I could even change it. Oh gosh, so now, press play. The arpeggiator on the Launchkey is still latched, so it's still playing. So let's go ahead and unlatch that. But as you can see in Ableton Live, I was able to record that. It just so happened that as we came back around and listened back to our recording, the Launchkey was still triggering at the same time, which was just chaos. Regardless, let's get out of this mode here and let's go back to our clip launching. Now now we've got that arpeggiation recorded. This is sort of especially useful if you're kind of stuck coming up with a melody or something. I mean, we talked about utilizing the scale mode earlier to come up with really simple melodies. Arps are kind of like in their own category of melody. They're almost melodies, but they're also like accompanying features. I like that. Okay, but now that we've got these three parts, we've got drums, we've got chords, and we've got this arpeggiator and melody track, let's talk about mixing them with the encoders. Now, before we go on, like I said earlier, I'm using my project from the last session, which already had drums and already had chords, which we made using the chord mode. If you don't have these set up yet, just take a little time, program a simple drum sequence, program a simple chord progression, and then add it to this kind of melodic component. And we're going to talk about mixing with the encoders now. So if I hold Shift and find the mixer pad, second pad on the top row, we get control over the track levels in our project. The volume and the track name will be represented here on the screen on the Launchkey, and you'll also see it reflected in our DAW as I turn these encoders. So I can do a little bit of mixing and find a balanced mix. This is also a good performance tool as well. So other than just adjusting the volume levels with the encoders, if we hold Shift, press Mixer, we can see encoder mode level. If I press this little down arrow in the top right, we get panning control. Let's take that ARP and pan it slightly right. Definitely take advantage of panning in your productions, especially as a beginner, but don't overdo it. Make a balanced mix. Anything that should be in the main focus should be in the center. That's why I'm not doing much with the drums right now. I don't really want to pan the entire drum track to the right. That doesn't make any sense, right? And probably the chords should stay relatively centered, but the arpeggiator, if I think about adding another melody later, I could balance it out with something on the left side. So that's panning on the encoders. There's one more control here I want to go over in this chapter, and that is the sends control, Shift and sends. Now, in Ableton Live, by default, it loads with two return tracks, A, reverb, and B, delay. And each track, as you can see, has a send. We can send it to A or send it to B. And that's what this encoder mode is going to allow us to do. So currently I'm sending track 3, the arpeggiator, to this reverb. But let's go ahead and change that to delay by holding Shift and the down arrow. Send B. Shift up back to the reverb. While I'm in send encoder mode, Shift down back to delay, and switch between these return tracks. I think that sounds pretty cool. Send the drums to a little bit of reverb. And let's send the chords to a bit of delay. Dial it into taste. Now, if you're a little confused, like, why are we sending a sound to a separate track with reverb and delay? Like, what's the point of this? Well, this is called parallel processing. And what it allows us to do is instead of having an effect directly on a synth, it allows us to run an effect in parallel to that synth. So that as we dial in the effect, as we send it to more of that effect, to that reverb or the delay, we don't lose the original dry signal. The original dry signal is unaffected. We're just sending some of that dry signal to an effect so that they can both coexist in parallel to each other. To demonstrate this, you can see that the moment I add a reverb to our arpeggiator and I dial up the dry wet, it gets completely washed out, right? We don't have any more of that dry signal left. When I run the reverb in parallel, turn the reverb up on the faded keys, I can send it all the way to that reverb, 100%, but it hasn't washed it out completely. I don't lose the original dry signal. That is the advantage of running an effect in parallel. So with this combination of things, right, we've learned how to launch clips and stop clips. We've now learned how to, change different levels of things. I could fade things in and out. Let's go back to mixer. That's the pan mode. We don't want to change the pan. Change the level. Let's fade our drums in. And suddenly we can start crafting performances around this control. Let's go back to send mode. Let's take off the reverb for now. Not sending this to any effects, but as this goes on, now I can start changing between the different parts. I can start doing a little bit of live mixing, sending things to different effects. And we can start developing the backbone or the foundations of a performance. Alright folks, I hope this was a helpful installment. As we build up your skills with the Launchkey Mini, I hope that you're feeling more and more confident producing with the controller and you're able to take full advantage of even more of the features. I'm always here to answer your questions, so if I left anything out or anything's a little bit confusing, let me know in the comments down below. I'm also always open to feedback or suggestions on where we should go next with the Launchkey Mini series. For now, that's going to be it. Thank you so much to the channel members. Don't forget that you can become a channel member and watch the next episode of this series right now, early before anybody else. That's going to be it. Thank you all so much for watching. This has been TAETRO. Have a good one.